In that gleaming glass room, their mocking laughter still echoes in my mind like a blade thrust straight into my pride. That day, I silently signed my resignation letter. No one knew that silence was the beginning of a long game that I would finish. They thought my quiet exit meant surrender. They thought wrong, because when you're dismissed as nothing, you become invisible, and invisible players make the most devastating moves. When the final piece fell, I wasn't the one who lost everything. My name is Carolyn West. And for 6 years, I carved my place at Vectoricom through sheer determination and countless 14-hour days. At 34, I'd earned my position as marketing team lead not through connections or favors, but through campaigns that consistently exceeded quarterly targets by margins that made executives take notice. Or so I thought. The Vectoricom Tower pierced Chicago's skyline like a glass needle. 42 floors of ambition wrapped in steel and false promises. From my corner of the 28th floor, I could see Lake Michigan stretching endlessly, its gray waters mirroring the corporate landscape I navigated daily. The office gleamed with that particular brand of sterility that expensive design firms mistake for sophistication: white walls, glass partitions, and those ridiculous motivational posters about teamwork that nobody ever read. I remember studying my reflection in my computer screen during those final weeks, noting how the fluorescent lights had carved shadows beneath my eyes. The woman staring back had learned to armor herself in tailored blazers and practice smiles, but the armor was cracking. Every morning, I'd arrive before 7, heels clicking against marble floors that echoed through empty hallways. By the time my team trickled in around 9, I'd already fielded calls from Singapore, reviewed analytics reports, and drafted 3 proposals. The thing about corporate environments is they seduce you with their gleaming surfaces while rot festers underneath. Vectoricom was no different. Behind our progressive policies and diversity initiatives lurked something far more primitive, a hunger that recognized only predators and prey. I'd climbed high enough to see both sides of that equation, watched colleagues transform from allies to adversaries the moment a promotion dangled within reach. My team respected me, or at least I believed they did. I mentored junior associates, fought for their raises, shielded them from executive tantrums. But respect and loyalty are different currencies in corporate America, and I was about to learn which one held more value. The whispers had started 3 months ago. Hallway conversations that died when I approached. Meetings scheduled without my knowledge, emails with reply all threads mysteriously missing my address. The isolation was surgical in its precision. First, they excluded me from strategic planning sessions. Then, my direct reports began copying others on emails meant for me. Finally, my access to critical databases was mysteriously under review. I documented everything in a leather journal I kept locked in my desk drawer, each slight cataloged with dates and witnesses. Not out of paranoia, but from an instinct honed by years of watching talented women disappear from org charts without explanation. What they didn't understand was that I hadn't survived this long by being liked. I'd survived by being necessary. My campaigns had generated $40 million in revenue over 5 years. My strategies had rescued 2 product launches from certain failure. But in corporate warfare, past victories mean nothing when the ground shifts beneath you. And the ground at Vectoricom hadn't just shifted, it had opened into a chasm designed specifically for my fall. The 28th floor had become my kingdom and my prison simultaneously. Every morning, I'd stand at those floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city wake beneath me, and feel the walls closing in. The view that once inspired me now felt like a mockery. All that space, all that freedom, visible but unreachable through layers of reinforced glass. Just like my career, just like my future at Vectoricom. They wanted me broken. They wanted me gone. What they didn't want was what they were about to receive, a lesson in what happens when you mistake silence for surrender. The conference room on the 40th floor was designed to intimidate, a glass fortress suspended in the clouds with a mahogany table that could seat 20. On that Tuesday morning, only 12 chairs were occupied, but the weight of their judgment filled every inch of space. Mitchell Crane sat at the head, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his $10,000 suit a testament to profits built on others' backs. "Caroline," he began, his voice carrying that particular blend of condescension and false concern that executives master in their sleep. "We need to discuss the Morrison account disaster." The Morrison account, my project. 6 months of strategic planning, flawless execution, and then failure. But not my failure. Someone had changed the media buy allocations 48 hours before launch, redirecting our budget to dead zones where our target demographic didn't exist. Someone with system access above my clearance level. The numbers speak for themselves. Laura Knox interjected from her seat at Mitchell's right hand. My former friend, former confidant. Her expression now carved from ice. She slid a report across the table, my name highlighted in red across every failed metric. $3 million in losses. The client is threatening to sue. I recognized the setup immediately. The altered data, the shifted blame, the careful orchestration that placed me at the center of a catastrophe I'd tried desperately to prevent. My emails warning about the budget changes had mysteriously vanished from the server. My calls to Morrison's team had somehow gone unlogged. Every safety net I'd built had been systematically removed. "This is particularly disappointing," Derek Halls added, barely concealing his smirk behind steepled fingers. "Given your recent performance issues." Performance issues. The phrase hung in the air like a noose. There had been no performance issues until they'd manufactured them, no complaints until they'd scripted them, no failures until they'd engineered them. The room erupted in a choreographed chorus of disappointment. Each executive took their turn dissecting my alleged incompetence, their words precise scalpels designed to fillet whatever remained of my professional dignity. They cited missed meetings I'd never been invited to, botched strategies that weren't mine, team complaints from people I'd never worked with. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Mitchell asked, leaning back in his chair like a judge who'd already decided the sentence. I stood slowly, feeling every eye track my movement. My hands remained steady as I reached into my portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of paper. The resignation letter I drafted at 3 a.m., when the truth had finally crystallized. This wasn't about the Morrison account. This was about removing an obstacle. Me. "I take full responsibility," I said, my voice carrying a calm that seemed to unsettle them. "Good." Effective immediately. The letter slid across the mahogany with a whisper. Mitchell's eyebrows rose slightly. They'd expected a fight, tears, maybe begging. Instead, I gave them nothing. "Well," Laura laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "I guess that's that. Probably for the best, Caroline. This level of strategic thinking was always beyond you." The others joined in, their laughter filling the space like poison gas. Comments flew like arrows about my ambition exceeding my ability, about women who couldn't handle pressure, about the mistake of promoting people who didn't understand corporate culture. Each word was carefully chosen to wound, to ensure I'd leave not just defeated, but destroyed. Derek stood, walking around the table to where I gathered my things. "Security will escort you out," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Standard procedure for terminated executives." Terminated, not resigned. They couldn't even allow me the dignity of my own exit. I straightened my spine, meeting each of their eyes in turn. Mitchell's cold satisfaction, Laura's triumphant sneer, Derek's crude amusement, the others, cowards who'd chosen their side based on the direction of the wind. I memorized every face, every expression, every tell that revealed their true nature. "Thank you," I said, and watched confusion flicker across their faces. For the clarity. The walk to the elevator felt endless, security flanking me like I was a criminal. Employees peered from their cubicles, witnessing my humiliation parade. But I didn't lower my eyes. I didn't hurry my steps. I moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had already decided that this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning they'd never see coming. The apartment in Oak Park was a deliberate downgrade. 1,200 square feet of calculated invisibility. No doorman to track my movements. No floor-to-ceiling windows broadcasting my presence to the world. Just functional spaces with good locks and better internet. I'd signed the lease the day after my resignation, paying 6 months up front with the severance they'd thrown at me to ensure my silence. They'd bought my quiet departure, not realizing silence could be weaponized. For 3 days, I did nothing but sit in my empty living room, letting the rage course through me like electricity. Not the hot, impulsive anger that makes people do stupid things, but the cold, crystalline fury that sharpens focus to a surgical point. I replayed every meeting, every slight, every orchestrated humiliation until the pattern emerged with perfect clarity. This hadn't been opportunistic. It had been planned for months, maybe longer. The transformation started with observation. I created a wall in my spare bedroom, covering it with photos, corporate structures, financial reports, all publicly available information that painted a very different picture when assembled correctly. Mitchell Crane at the center, his web of influence spreading through every department, Laura Knox, his protégé and enforcer, elevated to my position within days of my exit. Derek Halls, guardian of secrets that would destroy careers if exposed. But observation without action is just sophisticated voyeurism. I needed more than public records. I needed the truth they'd buried beneath NDAs and threatened lawsuits. So I became a student of patience, learning to move through digital shadows with the same care I'd once navigated conference rooms. The coffee shop on Madison became my office, every morning at 7. I'd claim the corner table with the good Wi-Fi and sightlines to both exits. The barista knew my order: black coffee, no sugar, no small talk. I appreciated the efficiency. I had work to do. Vectoracom's employees were creatures of habit. They used the same passwords across platforms, discussed confidential matters on unsecured networks, left digital footprints everywhere they went. I didn't hack, that would be illegal. I simply collected what they carelessly discarded, like picking up breadcrumbs they'd dropped along their path. LinkedIn told me who was dissatisfied. Glassdoor revealed which departments hemorrhaged talent. Twitter exposed who partied with whom, who harbored grudges, who felt overlooked. Every bitter post, every passive-aggressive status update, every photo from corporate events where alcohol loosened tongues and inhibitions, I cataloged them all. The pain of betrayal transformed into something more useful: methodology. I created spreadsheets tracking executive spending patterns, noting discrepancies between reported expenses and credit card statements that somehow found their way onto financial forums. I mapped relationships, affairs, addictions, weaknesses, not to exploit immediately, but to understand the architecture of their mutual protection. 3 weeks in, I discovered the first crack in their foundation. A junior analyst named Marcus Chen had been fired 6 months ago for performance issues, the same euphemism they'd tried to use on me. But Marcus had been investigating budget allocations in the infrastructure division. His LinkedIn activity went dark for 2 months, then resumed with carefully worded posts about ethical challenges in telecommunications and when whistleblowing becomes necessary. I didn't contact him. Not yet. Instead, I studied his digital footprint, understanding his motivations, his fears, his triggers. He'd kept copies of everything, a habit of paranoid employees who sense danger. His cloud storage, carelessly linked to an old email account, contained documents that made my pulse quicken. But I wasn't ready to move. The board needed to be fully set. My daily routine became monastic in its discipline. Wake at 5, review overnight developments in Vectoracom's stock price, map social media interactions between employees, cross-reference public records with internal communications that found their way onto Reddit threads and anonymous forums. Sleep by midnight, dreams filled with spreadsheets and revenge scenarios I'd never act upon. The impulsive plays were for amateurs. I was crafting something more elegant. The silence they'd purchased was working beautifully, just not in their favor. While they assumed I disappeared to lick my wounds, I was studying them with the dedication of a scholar preparing a dissertation. Every weakness cataloged, every pressure point identified, every alliance mapped. They'd given me the greatest gift possible, the assumption of my irrelevance, in my empty apartment, surrounded by evidence of their corruption. I felt something shift inside me. The woman who desperately tried to belong in their glass tower was gone. In her place stood someone far more dangerous, someone with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Someone who understood that the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served silently, from shadows they never thought to check. The wall in my spare bedroom had evolved into a chessboard of human failures. Each photograph pinned to its surface represented a piece in play, their positions carefully mapped, their weaknesses annotated in my precise handwriting. At the center, Mitchell Crane's corporate headshot smiled with the confidence of a king who'd never considered his throne might be built on quicksand. Mitchell Crane, CEO for 7 years, architect of Vectoracom's aggressive expansion. The financial press loved him. A visionary who'd doubled stock prices, a strategic genius who'd orchestrated 3 major acquisitions. But my investigation revealed a different story. The Brennan acquisition in 2022 inflated valuations that added phantom assets to the balance sheet. The Q3 earnings calls, carefully orchestrated theater that obscured operational losses through creative categorization. $3 million in consulting fees paid to a firm in the Caymans that existed only as a mailbox. I traced the money through public filings, connecting dots that regulators had somehow missed, or hadn't wanted to see. Mitchell's brother-in-law sat on the SEC advisory board. His golf partner chaired the auditing committee. The king had built his own ecosystem of protection. But ecosystems are fragile things. Remove one species, and the whole structure collapses. Laura Knox occupied the space directly below Mitchell's photo. The Queen, promoted to Senior Vice President of Marketing within a week of my departure. Her ascent hadn't been about merit, it had been about silence. I'd found the photos from the 2023 corporate retreat, her hand on Mitchell's thigh, wedding rings conspicuously absent. Her husband's LinkedIn showed he'd been traveling extensively that week. Mitchell's wife's Instagram placed her at their Hamptons home, alone. But the affair was just leverage. The real corruption ran deeper. Laura had been siphoning marketing budgets into shadow campaigns that never ran. Invoices for services never rendered. 20,000 here, 50,000 there, small enough to avoid triggers, large enough to fund her lifestyle. Her Hermès collection, documented obsessively on social media, told a story her salary couldn't support. The paper trail was subtle but damning, especially when laid out chronologically. Derek Halls presented a different kind of opportunity. The VP of Human Resources, keeper of corporate secrets, protector of executive interests. His weakness wasn't financial, it was behavioral. I'd identified 4 employees who'd left Vectoracom suddenly. All young women, all from his department, all with sealed settlement agreements. But sealed didn't mean silent. One had posted anonymously on a Me Too forum, details specific enough that I could match them to Vectoracom's timeline. Another had confided in a friend who'd tweeted vaguely but tellingly about corporate predators in expensive suits. The evidence was circumstantial but powerful when aggregated. Derek's access card data, obtained from a disgruntled security contractor on a freelance forum, showed patterns. Late-night office visits that corresponded with the women's employment dates. Sudden schedule changes that isolated them on empty floors. His corporate credit card charges at bars near the office. Always on nights when these meetings occurred. Beyond the trinity of corruption, smaller pieces littered the board. The CFO who'd been skimming from the pension fund. The head of procurement taking kickbacks from vendors. The board member trading on insider information. Each one connected to the others through mutual blackmail, shared guilt, or simple greed. They'd created a network of complicity, each protecting the others because exposure of one meant danger to all. I spent hours studying their interconnections, understanding not just their crimes, but their relationships. Who genuinely liked whom? Who secretly harbored resentments? Who would turn first when pressure was applied? Laura and Mitchell's affair made them natural allies, but also mutual vulnerabilities. Derek had dirt on both, but they knew about his predations. The CFO needed Mitchell's protection, but resented Laura's rapid rise. These weren't just corrupt executives. They were chess pieces with predetermined moves. Mitchell would sacrifice anyone to protect himself. Laura would claim ignorance and blame others. Derek would threaten and intimidate, each entirely predictable in their self-preservation. I began to see the pattern of their downfall as clearly as I'd once seen marketing strategies. The key wasn't to attack them all simultaneously. That would trigger their collective defense mechanisms. Instead, I needed to create fissures, to make them doubt each other, to transform their mutual protection into mutual suspicion. The plan crystallized slowly, each element tested against possible counters. I couldn't use anything illegally obtained that would make me vulnerable. But public information, creatively assembled and strategically released, was perfectly legal. The truth, properly timed, would be their undoing. Late at night, staring at my wall of evidence, I sometimes felt the weight of what I was planning. Not guilt, they'd earned what was coming, but a cold recognition that once I began this game, there would be no stopping until someone was destroyed. The only question was whether I'd properly calculated who that someone would be. The king, queen, and rook all stood in their positions, unaware that the pawn they'd dismissed had evolved into something far more dangerous. In chess, a pawn that reaches the opposite end of the board can become anything it chooses. I chose to become their reckoning. The network began with Marcus Reed, the analyst they'd fired 6 months before me. I found him at a WeWork in River North, hunched over a laptop in the communal area, dark circles under his eyes matching my own. When I approached, he looked up with the wariness of someone who'd learned to distrust unexpected visitors. "Caroline West," he said, not a question, but a recognition. "They got you, too." We talked for 3 hours that first meeting, comparing notes like survivors of the same war. Marcus had documented everything: budget discrepancies, falsified reports, executive signatures on documents they'd never read. He'd been building a case when they'd eliminated him, but alone. His voice was easy to dismiss. Together, we were the beginning of something else. Through Marcus, I met Sarah Winters, a former Vectoracom accountant who'd refused to sign off on questionable audits. She worked at a small firm now. Her career deliberately stalled, but her anger remained fresh. She still had contacts inside, people who fed her information out of loyalty or their own growing unease. Sarah brought receipts, literally, expense reports that told stories of excess and embezzlement, small fortunes disguised as business necessities. The journalist came next. Tom Rodriguez, hungry and young, working for a minor financial blog but dreaming of bigger things. I'd tracked his work for weeks, noting his meticulous research, his refusal to publish without verification. When I reached out through encrypted email with a sample of what I had, he responded within an hour. We met at a diner in Cicero, where nobody from Vectoracom would ever venture. "This is Pulitzer material," he said, scrolling through the documents on my tablet. "But I need more than paperwork. I need human sources willing to go on record." "You'll have them," I promised, "when the time is right." The hacker was Sarah's connection, a freelance security consultant named Alex who specialized in defensive penetration testing. Entirely legal, they insisted, and I chose to believe them. Alex didn't steal information. They simply showed us how vulnerable Vectoracom's systems were, how many employees used password 123, and how much sensitive data lived on unprotected servers. We didn't need to break laws when incompetence had left so many doors unlocked. Each person brought their own pieces to our growing puzzle. Marcus had internal memos showing Mitchell's direct involvement in hiding losses. Sarah had identified offshore accounts through pattern analysis of legitimate transfers. Tom had cultivated sources among Vectoracom's competitors, people eager to share rumors and suspicions. Alex had mapped the digital architecture of corruption, showing how information flowed and where it pooled in stagnant, vulnerable places. We met weekly in different locations: a library study room, a park pavilion, the back room of a sympathetic lawyer's office. No phones, no recordings, just handwritten notes that we'd burn afterward. Paranoid, perhaps, but we'd all learned the cost of underestimating our opponent. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tom's investigation had caught the attention of Jessica Park, a senior analyst at the SEC who'd been stonewalled in her attempts to investigate Vectoracom. Officially, she couldn't help us. Unofficially, she could point Tom towards specific public filings that deserved journalistic scrutiny. She couldn't open an investigation based on rumors. But if credible evidence became public, well, that was different. The problem with taking down kings, Jessica told Tom, who relayed it to us, is that you need to destroy their kingdom first. Otherwise, they just retreat and rebuild. She was right. Mitchell Crane wouldn't fall from a single scandal. We needed to dismantle the entire structure that protected him. That meant timing, coordination, and most importantly, ensuring that when the dominoes fell, they took everyone down together. I assigned roles like a director preparing for opening night. Marcus would compile the financial evidence into a comprehensive report. Every number verified, every claim supported. Sarah would create timelines showing the pattern of corruption, making complex financial crimes understandable to laypeople. Tom would prepare his stories, multiple angles ready to publish in sequence. Alex would ensure our communications remained secure and our evidence remained intact. My role was architect and conductor. I synchronized our efforts, identified gaps in our evidence, planned contingencies for every possible response. But more than that, I was the psychological warfare specialist. I understood these people, their egos, their fears, their pressure points. I knew exactly how they'd react when cornered, and I planned to use that knowledge to guide them toward their own destruction. Late at night, our plans spread across my apartment floor in charts and timelines. I felt the weight of what we'd built. 5 people who'd been crushed by Vectoracom's machine, now working together to dismantle it. We weren't vigilantes or heroes. We were simply people who decided that silence was no longer an option. The network was ready, the evidence was solid, the strategy was set. All we needed now was the perfect moment to strike, and I knew exactly when that would be. Vectoracom's annual shareholders meeting was in 6 weeks. The entire board would be present, the media would be watching, and Mitchell Crane would stand at a podium, confident in his kingdom's stability. He wouldn't see us coming. None of them would, because they'd already forgotten we existed. The first domino fell on a Monday morning, 3 weeks before the shareholders' meeting. Tom's article appeared on a minor financial blog at 6 a.m. Questions arise about Vectoracom's acquisition valuations. Carefully worded, meticulously sourced, raising concerns rather than making accusations. By noon, larger outlets had picked it up. By close of market, Vectoracom's stock had dipped 2%. Inside the tower, I knew panic was spreading. Sarah's contacts reported emergency meetings, lawyers summoned, PR teams scrambling. Mitchell released a statement dismissing the article as misunderstanding of complex financial instruments. Perfect. Denial was exactly what we'd anticipated. The second piece dropped Wednesday evening. An anonymous post on an investment forum, complete with spreadsheets showing discrepancies in Vectoracom's reported earnings. The numbers were accurate enough to be credible, vague enough to avoid legal action. Within hours, retail investors were asking questions on social media. The stock dipped another %. I watched from my laptop as Vectoracom's corporate Twitter account went into overdrive, reassuring investors, promising transparency. Laura Knox appeared on CNBC, her practiced smile not quite reaching her eyes as she deflected questions about marketing budgets. She looked tired. Good. Friday brought the third strike. A former Vectoracom employee, one of Sarah's contacts who'd agreed to speak off-record, told a reporter about pressure to falsify reports. No names mentioned, but enough detail that insiders would recognize the patterns. The weekend news cycle picked it up, and suddenly Vectoracom was trending for all the wrong reasons. Mitchell called an all-hands meeting Monday morning. The footage, leaked by someone still inside, showed him red-faced at a podium, denouncing coordinated attacks by disgruntled former employees. He mentioned lawsuits, investigations into corporate espionage, consequences for anyone spreading false information. His rage was beautiful. It meant he was scared. Week 2, escalated the pressure. Tom published a deeper investigation into the Brennan acquisition, noting public records that didn't match Vectoricom's claims. Jessica Park at the SEC, reading these public revelations, officially opened a preliminary inquiry. The announcement sent the stock tumbling 5% in an hour. The internal chaos was delicious to observe. Derek Halls sent a company-wide email about loyalty and confidentiality, threatening termination for anyone speaking to media. It leaked within minutes. Laura began throwing subordinates under the bus, claiming she'd been misled about campaign performance. The cracks in their alliance were showing. By the third week, the kingdom was burning. 3 board members announced they were requesting independent audits. A major institutional investor publicly questioned Mitchell's leadership. The financial press smelled blood, and every day brought new speculation about what else might be hidden. But we hadn't released the killing blow, not yet. The night before the shareholders' meeting, everything accelerated. At 9 p.m., Tom published his masterpiece, a comprehensive investigation linking Mitchell to the Cayman Islands consulting firm, complete with incorporation documents and wire transfer records, all obtained from public sources. At 10 p.m., screenshots of Laura's inflated invoices appeared on Reddit, posted by a whistleblower, whose identity even I didn't know. By 11 p.m., an anonymous blog detailed 3 cases of sexual harassment in Vectoricom's HR department, with enough specifics that reporters could verify the timeline. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did they. Mitchell's assistant, who'd never liked him, texted Sarah that he'd been at the office until 4 a.m. with the legal team. Laura had been seen crying in the parking garage. Derek had stopped answering his phone entirely. The shareholders' meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. By 9:30, protesters had gathered outside, former employees Sarah had connected with, holding signs about corruption and cover-ups. Media vans lined the street. The scene was set for a very public execution. At 9:45, I opened my laptop from my position in the coffee shop across from Vectoricom Tower. Alex had one final surprise: a website going live at exactly 10 a.m., aggregating all the evidence in one clean, professional interface, every document, every pattern, every connection laid out with the precision of a legal brief. The domain was registered offshore, the hosting untraceable. The content entirely composed of public information presented in a devastating new context. At 9:55, I sent a single email from an anonymous account to every member of Vectoricom's board, every major investor, and every financial journalist in Chicago. The subject line read, "The complete Vectoricom files live at 10 a.m." Then I closed my laptop and waited. The explosion would be visible from here. Not literal, of course, though the metaphorical blast would be far more destructive. In 5 minutes, Mitchell Crane would step to a podium to address his shareholders, not knowing that his kingdom had already fallen. The silence before devastation is a beautiful thing. And I had orchestrated it perfectly. The shareholders' meeting became a massacre broadcast live on financial news networks. Mitchell Crane stepped to the podium at exactly 10 a.m., his silver hair perfectly styled, his confidence a brittle mask. Behind him, the board sat in a line like defendants awaiting verdict. The website had gone live 30 seconds ago. Half the audience was already scrolling through their phones, faces shifting from curiosity to shock. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mitchell began, but a shareholder was already standing. "Mr. Crane, can you explain the $3 million paid to Cayman Consulting, LLC?" The question hit like a sniper's bullet. Mitchell's composure cracked for just a second, long enough for every camera to catch it. He attempted deflection, talking about complex international business structures. But another shareholder interrupted. "What about these invoices? Marketing services that never existed?" Laura Knox, seated behind Mitchell, had gone pale. Her phone buzzed incessantly as reporters who'd been investigating her background suddenly had all the pieces they needed. The Hermes collection, the affair, the embezzlement, it was all there, laid out with receipts. The Fed's criminal division had been alerted to the website simultaneously with everyone else. Jessica Park at the SEC, finally armed with the public evidence she needed, had fast-tracked an emergency freeze on executive stock sales. The news broke during the meeting. No golden parachutes would be deployed. Mitchell tried to maintain control, but the questions came faster than he could deflect. Why had 4 women in HR received settlements? What about the pension fund discrepancies? How did he explain the email trails showing direct knowledge of falsified reports? Then came the moment I'd orchestrated most carefully. Tom Rodriguez stood up in the press section. "Mr. Crane, I have a source who claims you personally directed the cover-up of the Morrison account manipulation. The source has documentation showing you ordered the budget changes that caused the failure, then blamed it on Caroline West to eliminate her. Care to comment?" The room erupted. Board members turned to stare at Mitchell. Laura's mask finally shattered completely. She knew those orders had her signature on them too, co-signing Mitchell's corruption. Derek Halls actually tried to leave, but security, there for the protesters, blocked the exits on police orders. Law enforcement had arrived. Mitchell's response was exactly what I'd predicted: desperate blame shifting. He pointed at Laura, claiming she'd acted without authorization. She immediately fired back, revealing his affair, his demands that she falsify reports. Derek, seeing the ship sinking, began documenting every illegal order he'd ever received, throwing both of them under any bus he could find. They turned on each other with the viciousness of cornered animals. 20 minutes into what should have been a routine shareholders meeting, Vectoracom's entire executive team was devouring itself on live television. Stock price fell 20% in 30 minutes. Trading was halted. The FBI arrived at 10:47 a.m. Not for all of them. They didn't have warrants yet for everyone. But Mitchell Crane was arrested on federal fraud charges as he tried to leave the podium. The image of him in handcuffs, with the Vectoracom logo behind him, would become the defining photo of corporate corruption for the year. Laura Knox wasn't arrested that day, but her resignation was announced by 2 p.m., along with a statement that she would be cooperating fully with authorities. Translation: she was trading information for leniency. By evening, she'd thrown Mitchell, Derek, and half the board under a fleet of buses. Derek Halls made it until Wednesday before the arrest warrant came through. The sexual harassment claims had triggered a separate investigation, and 3 more women had come forward once they saw him vulnerable. He was charged with both financial crimes and federal harassment violations. Within a week, Vectoracom had lost 60% of its value. The board chairman resigned in disgrace. 3 more executives were under investigation. The company that had seemed so invincible, so monolithic in its power, was hemorrhaging talent and capital. A competitor would acquire the remains within 6 months for a fraction of its former value. But the true beauty was in the details. Mitchell's wife filed for divorce and claimed all unencumbered assets. Laura's husband did the same. And her social media, that careful curation of success, went dark forever. Derek's victims filed civil suits that would drain whatever the criminal courts didn't take. Their carefully constructed lives collapsed entirely. The investigation would reveal more than even I had known. Mitchell had been stealing for a decade. Laura had destroyed 3 careers before mine. Derek had left a trail of trauma through 2 decades of corporate life. They weren't just corrupt. They were serial predators who'd finally met consequences. Marcus Reed was hired by the SEC based on his analytical work exposing the fraud. Sarah Winters started a consulting firm helping companies identify internal corruption. Tom Rodriguez won a Pulitzer nomination and a book deal. Alex disappeared back into the digital shadows, satisfied with their role in serving justice. And me? I sat in that coffee shop, watching the towers of Vectoracom as federal agents carried out boxes of evidence. My phone buzzed with interview requests, job offers, vindication in 100 forms. I ignored them all. The game was over. The king was in checkmate, the queen fallen, the rook toppled. Every piece that had seemed so powerful, so untouchable, was swept from the board by their own corruption finally exposed. I finished my black coffee and left a $20 tip. The barista who'd served me every morning for months simply nodded. Some victories don't need words. 6 months later, I sat in a different coffee shop, this one overlooking the Chicago River. The Vectoricom Tower still pierced the skyline, but its logo had been replaced. The acquisition was complete. The company dissolved and absorbed like it had never existed. Mitchell Crane was serving 12 years federal time. Laura Knox got 5 with possible parole in 3. Her cooperation had been thorough. Derek Halls received 8 years and would be a registered sex offender for life. The morning sun painted the river gold, and I watched the city wake up to another day of ambition and betrayal, triumph and destruction. The cycle would continue, just with different players. But something had changed in the corporate landscape. The Vectoricom scandal had become a cautionary tale, whispered in boardrooms and business schools. The message was clear. In the digital age, secrets don't stay buried. A woman approached my table, Jessica Park from the SEC. She'd requested this meeting through intermediaries, respecting my desire for anonymity even though she knew exactly who had orchestrated Vectoricom's downfall. "The investigation is officially closed," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Every executive involved has been prosecuted or pled guilty. The shareholders recovered about 40 cents on the dollar through the acquisition." "And the employees?" I asked. "The ones who'd had nothing to do with the corruption but lost their jobs anyway." "Most landed well. The acquiring company hired about 70% of them. The rest?" She shrugged. "Collateral damage is inevitable when kingdoms fall." We sat in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "You know there's a standing offer for you at the SEC. Your analytical skills, your patience, your ability to see patterns. We could use someone like you." I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd worn in months. "I appreciate it, but no, I'm done with institutions and their hierarchies." "Then what will you do?" I gestured to my laptop, where I'd been working when she arrived. "Consulting, helping small companies identify toxic leadership before it metastasizes. Teaching them to recognize the warning signs I ignored for too long. There's a market for that kind of wisdom, apparently." Jessica stood to leave, then paused. "They never knew it was you, did they? Mitchell? Laura? Derek?" "They went down without ever knowing who pulled the trigger." "They knew," I said quietly. "In their final moments of power, when everything was collapsing, they knew. They just couldn't admit it, couldn't accept that the nobody they'd dismissed had orchestrated their end. Their arrogance wouldn't allow them to see me as anything but beneath them, even as I destroyed them." She nodded and left. I returned to my work, a presentation for a startup about building ethical corporate culture from day one. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Reed. He'd been promoted again, now leading a team dedicated to preventing the next Vectoricom. Sarah sent a photo from her new office, her consulting firm thriving. Tom's book had just hit the bestseller list. We'd won more than just revenge. We'd carved out new lives from the wreckage of the old ones. As afternoon faded into evening, I packed up my laptop and walked along the river. The city stretched endlessly in every direction. Thousands of glass towers hiding thousands of secrets. In some of them, right now. Another Mitchell Crane was falsifying reports. Another Laura Knox was betraying a colleague. Another Derek Halls was abusing his power. But also in those towers were people like I had been, talented, dedicated, slowly realizing they were being crushed by corruption. Some would quit quietly, disappear into suburban anonymity. Some would speak up and be destroyed for it. And maybe, just maybe, some would do what I did. They'd embrace the silence, transform it into a weapon, and wage war from the shadows until justice looked like revenge and revenge looked like justice. I stood at the river's edge, watching the water flow endlessly toward the lake. The city's lights began to flicker on, transforming the skyline into a constellation of ambition. Somewhere in federal prison, Mitchell Crane was eating dinner off a metal tray. Laura Knox was learning to survive without designer clothes and sycophants. Derek Halls was discovering what it felt like to be powerless. They'd mocked my resignation, laughed at my silence, celebrated my destruction. They'd thought silence meant surrender. They'd been wrong. The day they mocked my silence, They didn't know that silence was their death knell tolling, and when the last echo faded, when their empire lay in ruins, when their names became synonymous with disgrace, only then did they understand the truth I'd always known. The quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous, because silence isn't empty, it's full of endings you'll never see coming. Thank you for listening to this story of corporate revenge and justice served cold. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect across continents and time zones. If this tale of workplace vengeance resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel for more stories of underdogs who refuse to stay down. And share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed corruption in your workplace? How did you handle it? Let's discuss in the comments below.